Hello, welcome to India Business Hour. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Here are the headlines we are tracking this evening. A flat end to a volatile day of trade for the market. IT and financials outperform while healthcare and FMCG stocks drag. Rupee ends another record low of 84.39. The Indian currency has depreciated 1% in the last 6 months. Slower government spending may prompt the Finance Ministry to relax expenditure caps in the fourth quarter. A final call will be taken once Ministry studies the expenditure numbers. Sources say that the government remains optimistic about meeting its capex and expenditure targets. Mutual funds continue to attract strong investor interest in October. Inflows into equity funds jumped 21% to a record above 41,800 crore rupees, led by all-time high flows into mid-cap and large-cap funds. Hybrid fund inflows triple as debt fund inflows surged to a 1.5 lakh crore inflows against outflows of over 1 lakh crores in September. Gross SIP inflows crossed 25,000 crore for the first time. The Asian Paint stock takes a drubbing, falls over 9% as the markets give its underwhelming second quarter performance a big thumbs down. A slew of brokerages turn cautious on the stock, citing weak demand, stiff competition and rising costs. Massive fire breaks out at an Indian Oil Corporation refinery in Vadodara. The incident took place at 3:30 in the afternoon. The cause of the fire is yet to be ascertained. Justice Sanjeev Khanna takes oath as India's 51st Chief Justice. In his 6-month-long tenure, he is expected to lead the bench on key matters, including a review of the Supreme Court's judgment on same-sex marriage and a review of the Sabarimala judgment as well. Ukraine targets Russia with its biggest drone attack yet. Flight services were temporarily disrupted in Moscow. Kremlin denies media reports of Donald Trump calling Putin and urging him not to escalate the Russia-Ukraine war, calls it pure fiction. United Nations Annual Climate Summit kicks off in Azerbaijan's capital Baku. Securing $1 trillion annually in climate finance for developing nations tops the agenda. The shadow of Donald Trump, a vocal climate change denier, also looms large over the summit. Brand Vistara flies into the sunset today. Its last flight will be from Mumbai to Delhi at 10:50 tonight. The brand will officially merge with Air India starting Tuesday and will fly with the prefix AI2.
क्या आप कहना चाह रहे हैं कि फाइनेंशियल डिपार्टमेंट के जो ब्यूरोक्रेट्स हैं उनकी जनता का कोई आधार नहीं है? आपको
बिल्कुल आधार नहीं है। अरे सरकार हम चलाते हैं।
Maharashtra Chief Minister Eknath Shinde rejects the warning of bureaucrats over lack of funds for welfare schemes, as Finance Minister Ajit Pawar has said that all is well. Also asserts that there is no fight in Mahayuti over CM face. Straight to the day's trading action. Dalal Street failed to hold on to intraday gains. Nifty and Sensex ended the day flat. The mid-cap index took it on the chin, falling nearly 1%. Banks outperformed the blue chips, with the index ending 0.5% in the green. FMCG and healthcare stocks were the other big laggards. The rupee slide continues. The Indian currency hit yet another record low of 84.39 to the dollar. The rupee has been under pressure following Donald Trump's historic victory in the United States presidential election. In fact, the rupee has ended lower in the last 3 out of 4 trading sessions since Trump sealed the race to the White House. Mutual funds have continued to attract strong investor interest in October. Inflows into equity funds have jumped 21% to a record high, led by all-time high flows into mid-cap and large-cap funds. Inflows into hybrid funds also tripled as debt fund inflows surged. Surbhi Upadhyay is here with more.
Well, what a solid showing by retail investors. They've kept the faith in the month of October as the market continued to move southwards with that 8% drop on the Nifty. So here are the numbers and they're looking fantastic. The net equity inflow number has crossed the 40,000 mark for the first time. In fact, not 40,000, make that 41,865. So nearing the 42,000 crore rupee mark. That's the level of inflow we've got in the month of October. SIPs, more records being broken here because the numbers have crossed 25,000 crores, to be precise, 25,323. That is the amount pulled in through the systematic investment plan route. The good news is that the flows have come in across categories: large cap, mid cap, small cap. thematic funds, hybrid funds, a lot of the different categories have contributed. On large caps, actually, we've seen very healthy inflows, almost 3,500 crores. And this is something that the industry has been crying out, saying that this is a good time to shift some allocation to large caps. So it seems to be finally happening. But the mid-cap category is where the maximum amount of money has come in if you compare the three market capitalization categories, because here the inflow is in excess of 4,600 crore rupees. Small caps have been steady, about 3,700 crores of inflows coming in over there. The story is really hybrids. And ever since we had the taxation change, some of the hybrid funds have become very, very attractive from a tax efficiency perspective. And that explains the kind of inflows that, let's say, the multi-asset fund category is drawing in. Balanced advantage has been very steady. And arbitrage funds have pulled in over 7,000 crores in the month gone by, which is the overall number for hybrids is looking very smart at nearly 17,000 crores. Thematic and sectoral funds have been the big trend for the mutual fund industry this whole year, and that continues. They've again pulled in close to 12,300 crores. And another, people will argue of a slightly healthy sort of statistic is the fact that this massive inflow of nearly 42,000 crores, it's not come in because of big ticket NFOs. It's existing funds, existing schemes which are also pulling in the money. In fact, the NFO inflow is fairly subdued at just about 6,000 crores versus levels of 14, 15, 16,000 crores that we've seen in the past as well. The total AUM of the industry has now crossed 67,25,000 crores. So fantastic showing by the retail investor who has kept his faith in the equity story.
Bitcoin has continued its rally, touching $80,000 for the first time ever. This as Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential election, along with the pro-crypto candidates being voted to the Congress, spurred expectations of a light-handed regulatory environment. The largest crypto assets' total market capitalization has neared $1.7 trillion mark, thanks to the 20% rise in the digital asset in the last 1 week. Slower government spending may prompt the finance ministry to relax expenditure caps in the fourth quarter. Sources say that a final call will be taken once ministry studies the expenditure numbers. Sapna Das is here with more. Sapna, tell us more about the government's plans.
Well, so if you look at the numbers which are already in public domain, we are aware of the fact that the expenditure has been slightly slower in the current financial year. Of course, first it was the election effect. But post that also spending doesn't seem to have really picked up in a big way. As per the H2 numbers which are there, you can see for yourself, the expenditure has been lower than around 44% of the budget estimate compared to some 47% last year. And look at capex. Capex is the one which has been really down. It's around 37.3% compared to 49% in H2 of last financial year. So that's where the real story hinges. Over 11 lakh crore is what the government has budgeted. Barely 5 lakh odd crore probably has been spent so far, or even under that. Having said that, keeping all of this in mind, it may just be possible that in the last quarter generally, to prevent bunching up of repayments and of bills coming up and, government's cash position getting impacted adversely, to avoid all of that, the government every year in the last quarter comes out with the cash management guidelines, the caps which are there in terms of public expenditure. Basically, 33% is the cap. Ministries and departments can't spend more than that in the last quarter, Jan to March. And particularly for the month of March, which is a very busy month, not more than 15% of the BE can be spent. So it may just be possible that looking at this overall trend that we are talking about, the numbers being on the lower side in the current financial year, it may just be possible that the government may consider not to reimpose these caps for the last quarter. It's just a possibility as of now. Detailed review meetings have already happened in the finance ministry. They are in touch with all the concerned ministries, departments, stakeholders, and they are still very optimistic that the overall expenditure target and more importantly the capex numbers will be met. But there could be a bit of a downside, so maybe that is something that we need to watch out for. Of course, no decision has been not taken in terms of not reimposing the caps, but probably a call will be taken closer to Jan. That's the time when they come out with that fresh circular talking about these caps. That's one. Second aspect, if you look at it, surprisingly enough, the state government borrowing also has been very much on the lower side. So around 8 odd lakh crores, 8.40 lakh odd crores is the budget estimate. That's what they're supposed to borrow up to December. And if you look at it, currently they're somewhere around 5 lakh odd crores. Of course, this is also because of heavy devolution coming in from the central government. But it may probably also indicate that some of the states are not really spending much. So that may be impacting the overall number. As per the government estimates, surprisingly enough, all the core ministries which are involved in capex, they probably are near meeting their targets. So this needs to be kept in mind.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Sapna, for getting us that very important story there. Let's move on. Shares of Asian Paints tumbled in trade after a weak second quarter performance that missed estimates. Volume growth fell 0.5% due to weak consumer sentiment as well as persistent rains and floods in some parts of the country. Quarterly net profit fell 44%, while revenues dropped 5% on an annualized basis. The company has said it remains positive about the second half of the fiscal. However, analysts are concerned over the rising competition. FMCG major Britannia misses street in the second quarter as rising commodity prices take a toll on its earnings. Net profit drops over 9% on a yearly basis. Revenue grows by 5% but misses estimates. Moving on, Nevaba Bupa Health Insurance IPO has been subscribed nearly 2 times on the third day of bidding. The retail investor category was subscribed 3 times, while the qualified institutional buyer segment saw a subscription of 2 times its allocation. Meanwhile, demand in the non-institutional investor category was comparatively lower, with a subscription rate of 70%. Moving on to the big newsmaker of the day, Ola CEO Bhavish Aggarwal has said that the company is on the path to profitability as its losses narrow in quarter 2. Speaking exclusively to CNBC TV18, Aggarwal said that he expects the auto business to turn EBITDA positive by next fiscal. Aggarwal also insisted that the service issues and backlogs are a thing of the past.
The auto segment EBITDA margin was very close to positive even last quarter. So our auto segment EBITDA margins, one can assume in that timeline will be in the positive territory. See, for the foreseeable future, I expect about 1/3 of our volumes to come from premium and about 2/3 from the mass. That would mean revenue of about 50-50. Any service backlogs are all history now. We are now doing more than 80% service requests within T+1 days. That means if you bring your scooter today, we will service it today or tomorrow. 80% of such issues are resolved in T+1 days. But our focus is to really build the future of the automotive segment, automotive industry with Ola Electric. And we are allocating capital wisely. We are on the path to profitability. So I do expect shareholders and prospective shareholders to join this journey and really build the future with us.
Maruti Suzuki has launched the 4th generation of the Dzire. The sedan will be available in 4 variants at a starting price of rupees 6.8 lakh. The car will also be offered on a subscription basis starting at a little over 18,000 rupees per month. The Dzire is the first Maruti car to score a 5-star rating in the global NCAP safety crash tests. Both CNG and petrol versions of the car will be available for sale. The Bombay High Court has granted medical bail to Jet Airways founder Naresh Goyal in connection with a money laundering case filed by the Enforcement Directorate. Earlier, Goyal was granted an interim bail to undergo cancer treatment, which was later extended. Further, today, the court has made the interim order permanent. Goyal was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate in September 2023. Vistara, the full-service airline founded as a joint venture between Singapore Airlines and the Tata Group, is bidding farewell to its identity as an independent brand as part of a strategic merger with Air India. Vistara will operate its last domestic and international flight tonight. Madiha Mujaber is here to tell you all about Vistara's 10-year journey and why it was decided to merge the brand with Air India.
Well, on the 9th of January 2015, Vistara had operated its first flight from Delhi to Mumbai. Almost a decade later, it will be operating its last flight tonight as a standalone brand. Now, before I sum up Vistara's solo journey and why it was decided to merge the airline with Air India, here's a farewell message by the pilot on one of Vistara's flights today.
Beginning tomorrow, Vistara will merge into Air India with a commitment to create a world-class global airline. This merger will open up a world of possibilities for you with a wider global network, added benefits, and a bigger new loyalty program. While we will not fly Vistara, we can continue to enjoy the familiar Vistara experience on Air India aircraft.
So Vistara will fly its last flight tonight. UK 986 will take off from Mumbai at 10:50 p.m. and land in the national capital. The last international flight, UK 115, will depart from Delhi at 10:45 p.m. and fly to Singapore. Now, Vistara was a joint venture between Singapore Airlines and the Tata Group, with each holding 49% and 51% stake. The airline had started its operations with Airbus A320 aircraft that flew its first flight on the 9th of January 2015. Within 3 years, in April 2018, Vistara received its 20th aircraft. The airline played a crucial role in getting the 5/20 rule removed. This rule, remember, limited domestic carriers from operating international routes unless they had at least 5 years of domestic operations and 20 aircraft. And then on the 6th of August 2019, the airline flew its first international flight from New Delhi to Singapore. In the last 10 years, Vistara grew into one of India's leading airlines, operating 350 flights per day across 32 domestic routes and 18 international routes, including London, Dubai and Paris. The airline's fleet also expanded to 70 aircraft, which featured 7 Boeing 787 Dreamliners, 53 Airbus A320s and 10 Airbus A321s. Now, Vistara was the first domestic airline to introduce premium economy on domestic routes and was also the first domestic airline to offer Wi-Fi facility on international routes. The growth reflected in Vistara's market share that grew steadily over the years from 1.3% in 2015 to 9.8% in 2024. But the growth came at a cost. Now, despite its strong growth in both fleet and routes, the airline struggled with consistent losses since its inception. And then in November 2022, the Tata Group announced the merger of Vistara with Air India. Singapore Airlines had a very logical explanation to the merger decision. It said that continuing as a standalone brand in India was far more risky than merging Vistara with Air India, considering the competitive headwinds. The merger with Air India will mark the end of one era and the beginning of another chapter for the Vistara family. Passengers taking the last flight tonight will be a part of history, witnessing the end of the airline's solo journey.
Thanks, Madhya, for joining us. Moving on to Court Corner, Justice Sanjeev Khanna took oath as India's 51st Chief Justice of India today. President Draupadi Murmu administered the oath of office to Justice Khanna, who will have a tenure of only 6 months before his superannuation. He also happens to be one of the very rare judges who was elevated to the Supreme Court without a stint as the High Court Chief Justice. Ashwin Kumar tells us more about India's new top judge.
The Justice Chandrachud era is over. Say hello to India's 51st Chief Justice, Justice Sanjeev Khanna. Justice Khanna was sworn in as the 51st Chief Justice of India this morning by President Draupadi Murmu. He was sworn in the presence of Prime Minister Modi, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, among other senior government functionaries. He's due to have a term of 6 months. He will retire on May 13th next year. Now, speaking of Justice Sanjeev Khanna, he began his journey as an advocate in 1983. He argued cases of taxation, arbitration, commercial law and environment law. After his stint as a lawyer, he was appointed as an additional judge of the Delhi High Court in 2004 and made permanent in the following year. In 2019 came the big surprise. Justice Khanna had been elevated to the highest court of the country. It led to many raised eyebrows. Justice Khanna had found favour with the collegium, even though there were 33 judges across high courts who were higher in seniority. What made this elevation even more interesting is that Justice Khanna had never been the Chief Justice of any high court. Justice Khanna is the nephew of the famous Justice H.R. Khanna, who rose to prominence after passing judgments during the emergency against the then Indira Gandhi-led government. But once he reached the apex court, he was in the thick of things. Like Justice Chandrachud, he was a part of the bench that upheld the abrogation of Article 370. As a part of a 5-judge bench, Justice Khanna also ruled to quash the electoral bond scheme as unconstitutional, and the judgment, coming just 2 months ahead of the Lok Sabha elections, made it even more consequential. The new CJI is also responsible for striking down a petition seeking 100% EVM VVPAT verification in the midst of the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. Justice Khanna also took the contentious decision to release the Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal from jail to campaign for the elections. Earlier in October 2023, Justice Khanna had refused bail to Manish Sisodia, but had allowed Sisodia to revive the bail application in this case if the trial was delayed. Turns out the trial was delayed, and Justice Khanna's order became the basis of Sisodia's release. Also, in one of his earlier decisions in the Supreme Court in November of 2019, Justice Khanna passed a landmark order holding that even the CJI's office was covered under the RTI Act. But there's still a whole host of cases that await his attention as the CJI. Gaming companies staring at a GST bill of 1.14 lakh crore rupees are looking eagerly Multiple startups will be looking to resolve the antitrust claims against Google. Kejriwal's plea challenging arrest is still pending, and so is the plea seeking criminalization of marital rape. Justice Khanna has a lot on his plate and just 6 months to do it in.
And coming up on India Business Hour, United Nations Annual Climate Summit kicks off in Azerbaijan's capital Baku. Securing $1 trillion annually in climate finance for developing nations tops the agenda. Loudspeakers go silent as campaigning ends for first phase of Jharkhand Assembly elections. 43 seats go to polls on Wednesday in what promises to be a tough fight between the incumbent JMM-led bloc and the NDA. 6 of the Phase 1 seats are reserved for scheduled castes and 20 are reserved for scheduled tribes. The Bharatiya Janata Party and the opposition alliance, Mahavikas Aghadi, have released their manifestos for the Maharashtra Assembly elections. The BJP has promised to launch a plan within 100 days of government formation to make Maharashtra a $1 trillion economy. It also promised to hike the monthly assistance under the Ladki Behan scheme to 2,100 rupees. The BJP will also hike the loan waiver for farmers and increase the old age pension. Meanwhile, the Congress-led Mahavikas Aghadi has promised monthly financial aid of 3,000 rupees for women under the Mahalakshmi scheme and free bus rides. It assured waiving farm loans of up to 3 lakh rupees and a monthly stipend for youth seeking jobs. The party also wants to conduct a caste census in the state. Bureaucrats have warned that the welfare schemes announced by parties come with a hefty price tag, as this will add further pressure on the state coffers. However, in a conversation with CNBC TV 18, Chief Minister Eknath Shinde dismissed these concerns over the state's finances and called them baseless. Talking about soybean, Shinde claimed that the government has been buying the crop from farmers, a claim which has been rejected by the farmers on several occasions. He added, efforts to increase purchase centres is also underway.
सेंट्रल मिनिस्टर जो कंसर्न मिनिस्टर है उनसे कहा, एग्रीकल्चर मिनिस्टर से भी कहा कि जो परचेज सेंटर है वो ज्यादा बढ़ाने की आवश्यकता है।
सर वो कहते हैं शुरू भी नहीं हुए हैं।
नहीं शुरू हुए हैं, कौन कह रहे हैं?
सर किसान कह रहे हैं।
देखो
पिछले ही हफ्ते उन किसानों से
देखिए, सेंटर शुरू है, बढ़ाने की जरूरत है, उसको बढ़ा रहे हैं। दूसरी बात, सोयाबीन और कपास जब भाव नीचे गिरते हैं तब हमने अभी 5,000 रुपया प्रति हेक्टर कपास को दिया, 5 हेक्टर प्रति हेक्टर सोयाबीन को दिया। वो जो गैप फिल करना है वो किया हमने। अभी नए सरकार में जो एक स्कीम की हुई है कपास और सोयाबीन को, जब उसके रेट नीचे आएंगे तो जो वीजीएफ होता है गैप फिल करने का, वो 20% तक हमने उसको स्कोप रखा है।
तो आप कह रहे हैं कि एमएसपी पे सोयाबीन की खरीदारी हो रही है?
बिल्कुल हो जाएगी और तेज हो जाएगी, और अगली बार तो ये 20% तक ये जो गैप फिल करना है, अगर रेट नीचे गिरते तो उनको मैच करना, ये भी सरकार करेगा।
Moving on to the latest from West Asia, where Israel continued its attacks on Gaza, Lebanon and Syria. At least 49 Palestinians were killed across the Gaza Strip yesterday, with 38 people killed in Israeli strikes across Lebanon. 22 women and children are among the dead after Israel bombed a family home in the besieged Jabalia refugee camp. Meanwhile, 23 have died in an Israeli airstrike on Lebanon's Beirut. There was no Israeli evacuation warning. Israel's military has said that it hit a Hezbollah site used to store weapons, and the strike was under review. Israeli airstrikes also hit the Syrian capital of Damascus for the second time in less than a week. 7 were killed in the attack, while 20 were injured. Russia and Ukraine have carried out their largest drone attacks against each other since the start of the conflict between the two nations. Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted 84 Ukrainian drones over 6 regions, including some approaching Moscow. 3 airports in the Russian capital were temporarily closed and flights were diverted yesterday. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 145 drones towards every part of the country on Saturday night. Most of the drones were intercepted. The Kremlin has refuted a U.S. media report that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump dialed Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time since the elections. A Washington Post report citing sources said Trump urged Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine and reminded Putin of the sizable presence of the U.S. military in Europe. In the run-up to the elections, Trump repeatedly vowed to end the Ukraine war before being sworn into office. The shadow of Trump and trade dispute looms large over Azerbaijan's Baku, where COP29, the United Nations annual summit of climate change, kicked off. The summit this time will stand testimony on whether wealthy nations would walk the talk when it comes to funding poorer nations bearing the brunt of global warming. With Azerbaijan, the host country itself, announcing plans to gas production and upcoming presidency of Donald Trump. Known as a vocal climate change denier, there is much skepticism over what can really be achieved. Rashna Dhanrajani is here with a curtain raiser.
World leaders have gathered for COP29 at Baku in Azerbaijan, focusing on some of the most pressing climate issues. This year's agenda is packed with key goals around climate finance, fossil fuel transition, and adaptation frameworks. First on the agenda is climate financing. Nations aim to replace the current $100 billion pledge that expires this year with a new, higher target that brings in private capital. Wealthier nations, however, insist that they cannot bear this alone and are looking to reform global finance structures to spread the costs. Then there's the fossil fuel transition. While COP28 marked a milestone, pledging to shift away from coal, oil and gas and new approvals for fossil fuel projects, especially in a country like Azerbaijan that is hosting COP29 this year, along with countries like the US, it shows that just how tough it is for this shift to happen. On the carbon markets front, countries are pushing for transparent rules to trade carbon credits, especially for projects like forest preservation that offset emissions. Business leaders are also calling for standards to ensure integrity. A major focus is also on loss and damage fund, which was launched to help climate-vulnerable countries with disaster recovery. And yet only $660 million have been pledged so far. And developing nations are urging wealthier nations to increase their contributions. But there are significant concerns clouding this summit. Former US President Donald Trump, who was recently re-elected, has vowed to withdraw the US from the Paris Agreement for a second time. This move could again weaken the global climate response. Another concern comes from China, which has urged that trade disputes like the EU's carbon border tax be included in these talks. These new tensions could complicate negotiations and the focus on climate goals could shift away. As world leaders work through these urgent issues, the question remains, will they be able to meet the moment and push the world toward the climate action, especially at a time when EU, UK key officials from these countries will not be participating in this year's COP.
Tesla CEO and Donald Trump supporter Elon Musk is endorsing the idea of allowing presidents to intervene on Federal Reserve policy. He retweeted a post by US Senator Mike Lee on X, which suggested that the Federal Reserve should be under the direction of the president. Senator Lee had ended his post with the hashtag #EndTheFed. The post came days after Fed Chair Jerome Powell said he would not resign from his post if Trump asked him to do so. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Business Hour. Thank you for watching. News continues right here on CNBC TV 18.